Welcome, everybody. I just want to apologize. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm kind of hoarse. Um, and so, I have a strong voice, but it sounds funny. Anyway, so it goes. Oh, hi, Jim. I'm just seeing you now. How are you? Okay, so this week's Torah portion is Hukat, and it's a really fascinating Torah portion. Pardon?
I said, hey, I'm
Oh,
Laura.
I see you now, Laura. Okay, now I see you. It's a fascinating portion because it's a portion of transition and actually of death. It's a transition from the first generation that came out of Egypt to the generation that will go into the land of Israel. Now, the portion actually opens. Chapter 19 is the first section, and chapter 19 gives the rules of the red heifer. Now, these are actually very strange rules. The red heifer is used to purify people who have been exposed to death. Someone who is taking care of a dead person, preparing them for burial, somebody who was in the room when somebody died, in the temple times, purity and impurity was a very, very significant thing because it meant, in particular, that if you were impure, you could not go to the temple. And so it was, and we learned in Leviticus, there are tons and tons of rules that we learned about in Leviticus, all different types of impurities and the different rules of how someone can go from an impure status to a pure status. Here, supposedly in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't really belong here. We suddenly have a discussion of this particular type of impurity. Death is considered to be the most severe level of impurity, which I think is actually very interesting because what that actually says is that purity and impurity is really about life, okay? And the various, I think we discussed this a bit in Leviticus, the various levels of impurity are related to some kind of loss of life, death, or something related, illness, sickness, something. And so the ultimate impurity is death, which basically is saying that the ultimate purity is life. Purity is about life, okay? But again, the question is, what are these rules doing here? And a wonderful rabbi, his name is Yoel Ben Nun, I think gave an explanation that is just brilliant. In the book of Numbers, chapters 1 through 18, all take place in the second year after leaving Egypt. At the beginning of the book, we have the census, we have the different camps, the flags, setting everything up. The tabernacle is there in the center of the camp. All the problems they had in the first year, they've kind of settled down. They have a tabernacle. Everything is good. So we have all that happening. And then, as we saw in the last few weeks, we have a gradual deterioration into all kinds of sin, till culminating in the punishment after the spies returned with their bad report, the punishment that this entire generation will end up dying in the desert, that the nation will spend another 38 years for a total of 40 years in the desert, and only after that will they be able to go into the land of Israel. Okay, so through chapter 19, we have what happened. We have, of course, the sin of the spies, and then we have last week's Torah portion where we talked about the rebellion of Korah. The nation is really going from bad to worse, okay? And that ends at the end of chapter 19. And now, at the end of chapter 18, okay? And then chapter 19 comes, and we have all these rules of the red heifer about purity. And then in chapter 20, we have the nation coming to Kadesh and Miriam's death. Actually, chapter 20 is already in year 40, because we have the order of what we see in this Torah portion. We're going to have Miriam's death, then we're going to have Moses and Aaron hitting the rock and the water and that whole thing. We'll discuss this, and at which point they're going to find out that they're not entering the land. Then Aaron dies. So we see right here already, Miriam and Aaron are dying. They die in the last year, okay? And then we have the final battles where they begin to conquer the eastern part of the land of Israel, the area east of the Jordan River. Again, that all happens at the very end during the 40th year, right before they enter the land. So essentially, we have 38 years that are unaccounted for. We have all kinds of stories and issues and laws and everything that took place or that were told to us that happened the first 2 years. And then we pick up again in chapter 20 with the last year. What happened in between? And so what this Rabbi Yoel Ben-Nun suggests, and I think it's brilliant, what happened in between is that people died. A whole generation died. And there's no stories about it. There's no discussion about it. What there is a hint about it. And that hint is the rules of purity and impurity with relation to death. The red heifer is the rules of purifying yourself after you've encountered death. It's kind of a way of the Bible saying, this is what they were involved with for 38 years. They were involved with death. Now, there's a very interesting midrash. And again, as I've introduced before, the idea of a midrash tells us a story. These are stories that were handed down through the generations. They may or may not have been accurate factually, but they're brilliant in the message they're giving us. So there is a midrash that actually is discussing two dates in the Jewish calendar. One date is the 9th of Av, and one date is the 15th of Av. On the 9th of Av, we all know from the book of Jeremiah, this is the day that the first temple was destroyed. And in Jewish tradition, we fast on that day. And indeed, it became a day of all kinds of terrible things throughout Jewish history. It's in the middle of the summer. The first temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. The second temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. And there were a number of other things that took place on the 9th of Av, including, amazingly enough, the decree of expulsion from Spain in 1492. The date that the Jews had to leave Spain or convert was the 9th of Av. There were also crusades that happened on the 9th of Av. It was just a bad day, okay? The source of this being a bad day, according to Jewish tradition, is in the sin of the spies, okay? When the spies come back, I'm going now to Numbers chapter 14. The spies come back and all this stuff happens and God punishes them and they realize, oh my goodness, what have we done? Chapter 14, verse 1, the whole community broke into loud cries and the people wept that night. That night, what night was it? Here, tradition says that night was the 9th of Av. And basically, the way the Midrash puts it, it says, you're crying over nothing. I'm going to give you something to cry about. This day that you've cried over nothing is going to turn into a day of many things that you will really be crying about. Okay? So Midrash tells that. And then the Midrash goes on to say, how did this happen that they died over a 38 period of time? Every year on the 9th of Av in the desert, they would dig graves. This is a very morbid story, I'm warning you, okay? Every year on the 9th of Av, they would dig graves, and everybody would lie in the grave. And the next morning, some would get up, and some didn't. And every year, a percentage of the nation died until all of that first generation died. And the last year, in the 40th year, they lay in their graves, they got up, no one had died. They thought maybe they miscounted, and they kept waiting, and they kept waiting. And finally, on the 15th day of Av, they realized, we finished. Everybody who's supposed to die has died. We are the ones who are going to go into the Israel. And so the 15th day of Av is to this very day, a day of celebration. There's a lot of other reasons why it's a day of celebration, but that's one. What I take from this story is this horribly morbid description of how this nation knew they were dying. I mean, think of it, digging a grave and lying in it. What does that tell me? That tells me you know you're going to die. And this cloud that hung over an entire generation where they knew sometime in the next 38 years they were going to die. Now, if somebody at the time was, 70 years old, to think that sometime in the next 38 years I'm going to die, it's not the end of the world. But for someone who was 20 years old to know that sometime in the next 38 years I'm going to die, that is a much more traumatic kind of thing. And so basically, I what I'm trying to say is I think in this chapter 19, they were dealing with death, and they were dealing with death in a very, very traumatic way. Comes chapter 20, and we're in the new generation, and we're in year 40, and we're ready to go into the land of Israel. Almost ready, okay? So, but we have a few final things to get rid of. The first thing that happens, as I mentioned, chapter 20, the first verse, Miriam dies. Right after Miriam dies, it tells us, the very next verse, the community was out without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. Here we have a classic situation. We had a very similar situation right after they left Egypt, 38 years earlier. Now we have a situation where Miriam has died and suddenly there's no water. And they complain, and God tells them, go take your staff, speak to the rock, water will emerge from the rock. Seems a very miraculous situation. And indeed, more or less that's what happened, but there was a little thing that went wrong. So first of all, I want to explain, I think it is not insignificant, and the Midrash notes this as well. It is not insignificant that immediately following Miriam's death, there is a lack of water. And in fact, the Midrash associate water with Miriam. There's a very nice Midrash that says there were three things in the desert that sustained the nation in a miraculous way. Water, wherever they went, they seemed to have water. That's pretty amazing considering they were in the wilderness. Manna, again, crazy food coming from heaven, very miraculous sustenance. And the third, they had these clouds of glory that act as a protection over them. For all those years, they were not attacked by enemies. We don't learn of any wars or any problems, okay? So this Midrash attributes each of these three miraculous things to Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. Miriam, the nation had water because of Miriam. There was something about her that merited the entire nation with water. She was associated with water. The nation had cloud protection from enemies, thanks to Aaron, and the nation had manna, thanks to Moses. And actually, what you see is because of these things, as soon as Miriam dies, there's a problem with water. Later on, as soon as Aaron dies, there's a war. They're suddenly attacked by Arad, okay? And as soon as Moses dies, when they enter the land of Israel, we learn at the beginning of Joshua, they enter the land of Israel, that the manna stops after the 30-day mourning period for Moses. So that's really the source for all of this. Okay, but let's go back to Miriam. How do we see Miriam associated with water? And here, I don't think it's just about associating with water. I think it's associating with water as a symbol of some kind of salvation. We first see that, of course, we meet Miriam for the first time in Exodus chapter 2. We don't even know her name yet. We meet her as the older sister of Moses. She's the one who puts Moses in that little cradle, puts it on the Red Sea, and stands there in the reeds to see, will Moses be rescued? And so she basically entrusts Moses to water and hopes that the water will indeed be a salvation for Moses, which it is, because as he's floating in the river, the daughter of Pharaoh sees him and saves him. Later on, just after the parting of the Red Sea, after they are saved, now the salvation of the Red Sea was not just that the water parted and let the nation go through, but it's also that the water came back and drowned the Egyptian army. So again, you have this amazing salvation of the nation through water. And right after that, we have Moses with his long song. Right after that, Miriam stands up on her own and sings her own song of praise for salvation to God. So in these two examples, you see that there's this connection between Miriam and water as a source of salvation. And here, of course, you see that as soon as she dies, there's no water. So the nation complains. Moses and Aaron bring us water. Terrible. We don't have any water. And you see here that God says to them, speak to the rock. I'll read this to you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I'm reading from chapter 20, verse 7. You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, to the nation, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock? And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. All sounds good, except then God gets mad. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation to the land I have given them. So here we have God punishing Moses and Aaron. It's not clear until now that they were not going to go into the land of Israel. They weren't part of the people who complained in the with the spies. Clearly not. So they would have continued to lead the nation into Israel, but here they are punished and told they cannot. What did Moses and Aaron do wrong? And there's a few different theories. I'll present two of them. One of them is that God had said, speak to the rock. And in fact, what Moses did is he hit the rock. Now the question is that such a significant difference? Moses was constantly hitting things with his rod. You know, he hit the Red Sea and he hit all kinds of stuff. So is this really such a big deal? On the other hand, you can say God said speak and he hit. It's a difference. Another theory is that he said, and this kind of makes sense with what God says to him. What God says to him, because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity, to sanctify my name, okay? What does Moses do? What do they say? They say, shall we get water from you out of this rock? They made it sound as if we're doing it. We're going to do the rock. They didn't say, watch out, guys. We're going to wave the rock, hit the rock, doesn't matter, and you will see God pour forth water from the rock. They didn't say that. They said, we're going to bring you water. So that's very clearly could have been a punishment. And then it makes sense what God says. You missed an opportunity to make sure the nation understood that this is God doing this miracle. You missed an opportunity to sanctify God's name. But I think if you look at the whole situation, including all the different interpretations, what you see here is that they're kind of losing it, okay? Here's a problem. Moses goes to God. God tells him there's a solution. There shouldn't be any room for anger. And yet Moses is very angry. He lashes out at the nation. He says, listen here, you rebels. Well, what did he have to do that for? God just says, go to them, speak to them, show, He calls them rebels. He hits the rock. Maybe that's an expression of the fact that he's angry. He's not calm. And of course, he says, and we're going to show this to you. Maybe he didn't, I'm sure he didn't mean to say, oh, we're the ones who are doing it. But he was angry and he expressed himself as his anger or their anger vis-a-vis the nation. And so therefore, it's very possible that what we see here is not just this, they missed an opportunity to sanctify God's name, which is clearly present, but a much broader issue. An issue that Moses and Aaron are tired. They're weary. Okay, this is a new generation. It's very possible that their expectations for this generation are much higher. They put up with the complaints and the sins, all those, those first 2 years. And I'm sure it's continued in one way or another over the other years. But as that generation died out, The expectation is here's a generation who were youngsters or were not yet born when they left Egypt. And so their whole adult existence has been growing up under the direct protection of God, the clouds of glory, the manna, the water, all of these miraculous ways that God is providing them with sustenance. Moses and Aaron anticipate that they're not going to have problems anymore. They're not going to have complaints. But the nation of Israel, like everybody else, they're human beings. And when they don't have water, they're going to start complaining. And, the question is it a really serious complaint? Is it something that can be easily headed off with just some calm talk? Clearly, God seemed to think, you just talk to them. Talk to the rock. We're going to solve this problem. This is not a big deal. God was not angry, okay, at the nation. He just told Moses what to do about it. It's Moses who's angry because he's tired. And so he's basically putting on this new generation, seeing them as just coming on the heels of 40 years of complaints. And neither of them, they are not able to look at this new generation as a new generation that is deserving of a new start. And that perhaps it is important that for this new generation, they have a new leadership, a younger leadership. And maybe that is really what lies behind this punishment, that it's Moses and Aaron are not going to be able to take them in. Okay. So I want to go back to the order of events, and let's see it again in this Torah portion, and let's see it again in context. The first subject is in chapter 19, the red heifer. As we said, that represents the death of an entire generation that takes place over close to 38 years in the desert. That is what was going on, okay? Then we have the death of Miriam, and as a result of the death of Miriam, who was associated with water, there's suddenly no water. We have this incident of Moses and Aaron and the rock and the water, and the punishment to Moses and Aaron, what we see from here is that they are not able to continue. They too will die in the desert. After which Aaron actually dies. This is in chapter 20, verses 22 to 29. We have, Miriam dies. It's just one sentence. In death of Aaron, we have several verses about the death of Aaron. There's a handover. And this also tells us something. Miriam was not a leader. She was an important woman, but she wasn't part of the leadership. Moses and Aaron were the leaders. Moses represented the political leader and the prophet. Aaron is the priest. And so what we have here, when Aaron dies, it's a very orderly handing over to his son Eleazar, who will then become the next high priest. Right after his death, we have the king of Arad, one of the Canaanite kings, decides he is going to war against Israel. Now Israel wins, defeats Arad, but that's also some kind of indication that this cloud of glory that kind of protected the nation from having to deal with the enemies has dissipated now that Aaron has died. After that war, we have another incident of complaining, okay? The nation complains, and it's actually a very odd complaint at this point. They've been given water. They still have the manna. They've just defeated the Canaanites. Why are they complaining? And they go back to a complaint that sounds very much like the kind of complaints we heard in the second year. Why did you make us leave Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread and no water, and we have come to loathe this miserable food. The miserable food that they're referring to is the manna. They're tired of it. It's boring. Okay? So, and as a result, God sends these snakes and scorpions and whatever, and then they do this whole weird thing. They make this thing with a snake, and they look up to it, and Moses prays, and they're all healed. Very interesting, by the way. I'm sure you've seen the picture of this Nachash Nechushtan, is it called? I don't know what it's called in Hebrew. Nachash Nechoshvet, copper serpent. Oh, a serpent. Okay. It's a staff with like a serpent that goes around it. Okay. And it's something that Moses created. It's weird. I'm not going to discuss why it's really weird. That's a subject for a whole different class. But what's interesting is the point of it is they looked up at this, they prayed to God, and God healed them. This staff with the serpent around it is the symbol of Israeli medicine. Okay, because it's like it's the healing. Okay, it's a symbol of healing, which I think is very interesting. Okay, anyway, and after that we have two more wars. We have the war against the Amorite and the war against Bashan. And in both cases, they win. And this is actually Moses' last. You could see in a way, Moses is the one who leads them in these battles. It is actually giving him an opportunity to take part in some of the conquest of the land. These two battles enable the nation of Israel to conquer the area east of the Jordan River. Moses is allowed to be in that part of the land. He just can't cross the Jordan River. But it is still part of the land that is given to the nation. So in a way, we have this Moses gets the chance to take part, even though he's just been fired. Okay, he basically, God says, okay, your time is coming to an end. You're not going to be able to take them into the land. But at the same time, we see that God gives him an opportunity at least to participate to some degree in the conquest of the land. But what we also see here is this gradual transition, not just from the one generation to another, but we have begun the gradual transition from a miraculous existence to a natural existence. Now, we're going to see that transition very, very sharply in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, particularly in chapter 1, but in the first initial chapters. And as I mentioned earlier, in the beginning of Joshua, you have after the 30 days of mourning for Moses, the manna stops, and for the first time, the nation of Israel eat from the grain of the land. Okay, this is after they crossed the Jordan and they're in the Gilgal. They have not yet conquered anything, but they're just camped there in the Gilgal on the western banks of the Jordan River. And for the first time, they eat natural food. They eat from the wheat of the land, okay? And this, then we see the initial battles of Joshua go from the first battle with Jericho, which is a completely miraculous battle. But they do have to have men, they have soldiers, they surround the city, they blow the trumpets, the walls come tumbling down. But then they do have to go in and battle. Little by little, the miracles drop away and the battles become more natural. And I think we see here at the end of this Torah portion, the beginning of this transition, where they are no longer the water, they have the water, they still have the man, but they're starting to complain about it. You have a sense that water stopped and it had to be renewed. You have a sense that these things are coming to an end. You have a sense that the time of no wars is over. Don't forget, they had one battle at the beginning when they first left Egypt, Amalek, and after that they had nothing. And now they start with these different wars. They had Arad, and they have Sichon, the king of Amorah, and the Bashan, and they're conquering land, and they're really starting to move forward. They're also talking to Edom, can we go through your land? We have to bypass your land, etc. They are now starting a natural process of entering the land and conquering it. They're not sitting around anymore in their camps and under this cloud of glory. They are now becoming a nation, organizing an army, and getting ready to go into the land of Israel. So as I said, this is a Torah portion of transition. And I think from the beginning to the end of the portion, we can see this transition playing out. That's all I have to say, and I would be happy to hear your comments. Feel free to unmute yourselves and anything you want to say.
Sondra, I just came from another lecture that suggested that Aaron was penalized for his part in the golden calf, and that's why he died at this time. But I just can't quite understand why God would have waited so many years for retribution.
Well, I think that is definitely an answer there, and I think what that solution answers. It seems here that what was going on with the nation, it was mostly Moses. In other words, if you look at verse 10 in chapter 20, it says, Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation from the front of the rock, and he said to them, okay, they're both standing there, but only one of them said, listen, you rebels. And the assumption is the person who's speaking is Moses.
Yes.
Moses is the angry type. Aaron is not. So I
Yeah.
think what that answer goes to answers, was Aaron really such a major contributor to the problem here? And so that gives us an answer. Well, maybe,
I see.
add to it what happened with the golden calf.
I see.
I think at the end of the day, I think that a better way of looking at all of these things are factors. But I think at the end of the day, God felt that both of them were weary.
I'd say.
And it wasn't as much a punishment as it was time to move on. The nation needed a different leadership.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, and feel better.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment or a question? Yes, Yvonne.
That was so interesting from the Midrash about the three protections in the wilderness and relating them to Miriam and Moses and Aaron, the manna and the cloud of glory and the water. I found it really interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, the Midrash is just a wellspring of brilliance, and the way it says these things through
Right.
stories, through symbols, it's just something you just have to learn and appreciate what it's trying to say.
Mhm.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is Jim. I hope you get well quickly.
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm feeling so much better. It's just my this is what
Yeah.
happens when I finish with a cold, I get a bit hoarse. But I'm feeling so much better. So thank God. And thank you, Jim, for your good wishes. Okay. Anyway, it's good to see all of you. Have a great weekend. Shabbat Shalom. I'll see you again next Thursday.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
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 Shabbat Shalom.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.